How's it going, everyone? Nerd Person Shooter here, and today I want to talk about a few games that I really liked, at least growing up, or liked at the time that I played it, that didn't get very good reviews from critics. I have five specifically I want to talk about. Now, I did make a video, a similar video to this, like a decade ago, back in 2015, I think, about guilty pleasure games, and I apologize if this is kind of like a repeat of that, but I think I have played a couple games since making that video that I really liked that got bad reviews or mediocre reviews at best. And I kind of want to just give my thoughts because why not? Now, growing up, I had a Sega Genesis. It was the very first console that my family had, actually, followed by the original Game Boy. And we used to pick up a lot of licensed games. Most of these games aren't known for their quality, but when you're a kid and something's based on a movie that you really like and you're kind of more forgiving in that regard. Well, I wasn't aware that this game didn't get good reviews until I was much older when we finally got internet. But one of my absolute favorite games to play on the Genesis back in the day was Stargate. This is based on the 1994 sci-fi movie with Kurt Russell and James Spader. And I always thought it was a very faithful adaptation to the movie for the most part, and I always found it to be a really fun kind of side-scrolling adventure where you play as Jack O'Neill fighting like aliens and just all sorts of like wacky shit. And I remember one of the things I really liked about this was the music. Like, I thought the music was even better than in the movie. The main theme song, it's engraved in my head and always will be. But this didn't get good reviews, apparently, and I'm just like, to this day, I'm still kind of scratching my head. I'm like, why not? I mean, yeah, it does get a little repetitive exploring everywhere and how a lot of places look exactly the same, but you can say that about a lot of games. You can say that about like every Bethesda game, like, Fallout, where every cave looks exactly the same, every vault looks exactly the same. Elder Scrolls, every cave looks exactly the same. A lot of games are just like that. So, I kind of grew up not being bothered by like recycled locations quite as much. I say that now, but it does bother me occasionally. But I don't know, back when I was a kid, this was hot shit for me. Like I used to remember looking forward coming home from elementary school, popping this in, putting my password in, and they have like these weird symbols for passwords. It's not just like letters and numbers, it's like symbols that I thought were really cool. I'm not sure if I'd like Stargate as much as I used to, but I have very fond memories of this game. It's actually one of like my top five favorite Sega Genesis games. Another game that didn't get quite as good reviews as the previous ones was like Road Rash 3. Road Rash 3 is my favorite Road Rash game, but for some reason that didn't get nearly as good reviews as the first one. I'm just like, why? It's got more weapons, it's got more variety in locations, like you're traveling around the world as opposed to like just like America or the Pacific coast. I don't know why. But yeah, those are two of my top five personal favorite Genesis games, Stargate and Road Rash 3. Maybe Streets of Rage is up there too. Now, fast forward a couple years, we have a Sega Saturn game that got panned. For good reasons, to be fair. It's what I call a prototype game. A game that had really bold ideas at the time, but they just couldn't really quite make it work. But I still really liked it a lot as a kid. And I think that's only because at the time it was kind of like the first action RPG I ever played, you know, and that is Virtual Hide-Glide. This is a game that gets shit on a lot. Like I said, for good reasons. First, it runs at like a solid 5 frames per second. And there's nothing you can do about it. Like, that's like the code of the game. You play as this guy who's apparently named Jim. Like, really? Just like the most random American name, Jim, in this fantasy setting where you fight zombies, walking trees, little goblin men. There are bosses like a vampire, three-headed snakes, an evil mage, you know, and you collect these three fairies to create one big fairy, and you gotta kill the big baddie, and it's just, it doesn't really make much sense in terms of story. It just, but like, look at this cover. There's like so much going on. Like, you play as this guy right here with the goofy fairy armor holding the sword, and you have to save the princess right there. She's right there. That's the evil mage right there, the guy with the brownish red robe. This is the main villain, Viralis. That's that's the snake that you fight in the cave. There's so much going on, and there's a castle here behind the princess. That's where you fight the vampire. And you know, I think when my brothers got this, this was back in the day, man, when we had like no internet and we couldn't really tell what games were worth playing. We bought a lot of games based on the cover. So this was one of the games you picked up when we were playing Saturn, you know, back in the mid to late 90s. And, you know, there's just so much going on with the cover. It's like, this looks like an epic game. You know, you're fucking fighting skeletons too, you know, uh, right there. You can't really see it because I have a blurry ass phone. But yeah, you know, action RPG. Like, this is like the first action RPG we ever played, you know. As a matter of fact, this might have been like the very first RPG we played because we didn't grow up playing any like RPGs on the Genesis, and we got the Saturn way before we got the PlayStation, where we finally played like the Final Fantasy games and stuff. I feel like Virtual Hide-Glide is the first game, the first RPG our family had. It was really unique, but at the same time, it was like badly unique. It had bad frame rate, horrible sprite graphics. I mean, it's an absolute eyesore, and it is just stomach churning. If I played this now, I'd probably fucking hate it. It's garbage. It's a badly programmed game, but at the same time, it was one of those just like really goofy, absurd experiences that I loved playing as a kid, you know, and I accepted all of its faults and gimmicks and weirdness, and I still to this day have fond memories of it, more so than unfond memories. I love the music. I love the menu theme. Like, it's so mystical and magical feeling, you know. So much nostalgia. This and Stargate, two of the most nostalgic games I have. So yeah, that's 2 out of 5. Now these next three games I want to talk about are games I don't have physical copies for. I own two of them digitally, and I used to have one of them until I sold it. That's only because there just wasn't anything more for me to do. And that game was Two Worlds on the Xbox 360. This is another game that had a really bad reputation. It was originally slated to be the Oblivion killer, like a year after Oblivion came out, and it just wasn't. Again, this was another game that had really bad graphics, really bad frame rate, really bad bugs. It had really funny voice acting though. It was like really bad voice acting. Like, they weren't professional voice actors, but it was just really really hilarious. Like, your swords, like your bladed weapons do not make slashing sounds. They made like punching sounds. And it was just so wrong. Pro Jared did a really funny video about this. I think it was like the very first review he made of a video game. But his review of it was so hilarious. And they came out with a second one, and I remember bashing the second one more when I first played it on PS3 way back in 2013. I even made that was actually my very first video review for a game was Two Worlds 2. But I went back to it like last year, and honestly, I don't really mind it so much now, weirdly enough, even though my criticisms are still kind of valid. That one also has a bad frame rate, but not as bad as Two Worlds 1. I still think the controls were a little bit better on Two Worlds 1, because Two Worlds 2 had that problem where like R2 did everything. Like if you stand still, R2 was crouching. If you started running, R2 became sprinting. And if you pressed down to equip your main weapon, R2 was attacking. Bad controls, man. Two Worlds 2 has some bad controls. I don't remember Two Worlds 1 having that shit. So, honestly, Two Worlds series as a whole is kind of like a love-hate relationship I have, but mostly love. It's kind of one of those so good I mean, so bad that it's good experiences in terms of like fantasy RPGs. I want a Two Worlds 3 so badly. I really do. I don't think it's going to happen. As a matter of fact, I think the developer who made the second one went out of business. Reality Pump Games. It was either Reality Pump or Topware Interactive, but they kept saying that they're going to make a third one, and it's going to be delayed until 2009 or 2019, and then 2019 happened, and then they said it's not going to be here before 2023, and now it's 2025, and there's no word on it. I don't think this thing's coming out, man. Like it's right up there with Half-Life 3 and Beyond Good and Evil 2 at this point. I got no faith in any of those games coming out at this point. But yeah, so that's the third game on this video that I'm talking about. The fourth game is a game that I don't have a lot to say about, and admittingly because it was a pretty forgettable game, and that was something that a lot of developers pointed out. And it was a third-person shooter game called Dark Void. I think I got this on Games with Gold like 10, 12 years ago back on Xbox Live, back when Games with Gold still gave us like free games to actually keep even after our gold expired. So I own it that I got for free with gold. And I was surprised at how much I actually enjoyed it. I thought the controls were really fluid, but like I said, it's also one of those games where it played a lot of things safe. You know, I don't really remember much of it. All I do remember though is that I enjoyed the gameplay of Dark Void. It kind of reminds you of like Iron Man. Like you're playing as like this guy who can fly around and shoot people and shoot aliens and stuff. And I just had a really fun time with it. But like a lot of developers, they gave it like threes and fours and some of them fives, but like no higher than five. To me, that was like a seven or an eight. I don't really have a lot to say about it. All I can tell you is that I definitely liked it more than most critics did. And then lastly, last but certainly not least, is a game I played a few years ago on PS3. It was the director's cut, even though the only differences I could tell was that it gave you like a bunch of profile pictures and themes and stuff. It didn't really add any content, actual new content to the game. So director's cut is putting it loosely. This game was called Deadly Premonition. This was it was like an open world sandbox, but also kind of horror game where you play as a detective named Francis York Morgan. And it borrows heavily from David Lynch's Twin Peaks television series. He plays a guy investigating the death of a young woman. Or maybe I'm just describing Twin Peaks. I don't really remember the plot of Deadly Premonition. You're investigating some murder. I remember that much. But all I remember is how, once again, how bad the frame rate was, how choppy it was, how ugly the graphics were. They were like bad PS2 graphics, and this is a game that came out in like 2009. Um, but most of all, the voice acting was so over the top, just so bad. But so much personality, oozing with personality. I love Deadly Premonition. Um, During missions, when you're in like little fantasy levels and stuff, you fight zombies, and like even they say funny shit. Like every time you kill a zombie, they're like, "Don't want to die," and then they like melt. I, I don't know what the fuck is going on in this game, but it's so bad it's good. Deadly Premonition is the epitome of so bad it's good on video games. I understand that it's not a game for everyone, obviously, but it didn't change the fact that I had a lot of enjoyment with it. It made me laugh so hard. There are so many inappropriate things about it. The daughter of some gas station owner is always like scantily clad, like one of those like stereotypical bikini girls, washing cars. Like it's like borderline like misogynistic and offensive and shit. Whatever, like it's so out there. It's just so bizarre, and it's not to be taken seriously. You can't go into Deadly Premonition expecting a very compelling, gripping, professionally written, professionally acted narrative. No, it's not. It's goofy. It's just so silly. It's it's horror, but it's not scary. It's not scary at all. It's funny. It's a comedy horror game. There we go. Deadly Premonition is a comedy horror game. Francis York Morgan, he says funny shit too. He talks to his coffee. I'm not joking. No, he talks to an imaginary person in his head, Zach, about coffee and how coffee can predict how his day is going to go. And I know that was kind of like a thing in Twin Peaks, but it's doubled down in Deadly Premonition. Um, I love Deadly Premonition. Sadly, they never remastered it, or maybe they did. I think they did, but only on Nintendo Switch. And they did come out with a Deadly Premonition 2, only on Nintendo Switch and maybe PC. But I hear that game's not so bad it's good. I hear that game is just so bad. Period. I hear that Deadly Premonition 2 lacks the charm of 1, and maybe that's only because it suffers from what I call sequelitis. A sequel just for the sake of existing. That happens, you know. And especially if they didn't address all the bad things that were wrong with Deadly Premonition 1. Like, you could say Deadly Premonition 1 is so bad it's good by accident. Like they didn't really have the money to make it better. But if they did on the second one and they chose to purposefully make it bad, that doesn't work. That's not how so bad it's good works. It's got to feel like genuinely homemade, like really low budget homemade, like they didn't have a choice. That's the only way it works. But anyway, guys, I'm going to end it here. What are games that didn't get good reviews that you guys liked? It could be a game that you grew up playing. It could be a game that came out recently that got bad reviews that you actually enjoyed. Definitely let me know. I love talking about these types of things. Stay tuned because in a few weeks I do plan on making an opposite video. Critically acclaimed games that I either hated or didn't care for. That's coming up next. I have a few selections for that as well already, but I'm trying to spread out videos to make it look like my YouTube channel is more active than it is. So, stay tuned for that, and as always, thank you very much for watching. Nerd person shooter out. Apparently that's the thing that I'm going to be doing now. Maybe not. We'll see how I feel.